What if I told you some of America's most comforting, mouth-watering recipes have slipped quietly out of our kitchens, almost forgotten? From rich stews born in hardship to simple breads that carried families through lean winters, these dishes weren't just food. They were survival, celebration, and memory on a plate. Today, we're bringing them back. The pillowy warmth of chicken and dumplings, the coastal pride of a lobster roll, the indulgent Kentucky hot brown, the hearty miner's pasties, and so much more. Each one tells the story of a time, a place, and the people who made them. So pull up a chair, because we're about to rediscover the flavors America once couldn't live without.
Sometimes, the most comforting meals are born from struggle. Chicken and dumplings wasn't a dish of luxury. It was a dish of necessity. During the lean years of the Great Depression and the rationing days of World War II, families had to stretch every scrap of food they had. Whole chickens were a rare treat, and when they appeared, nothing was wasted. From bones to broth, every part mattered. The brilliance of chicken and dumplings lay in its simplicity. A pot of simmering broth, seasoned with onions, carrots, and celery, became the foundation. Into that, tender shreds of chicken were added. Not much, just enough to flavor the pot. The real star, though, was the dumplings. Made from flour, fat, and a bit of milk or water, they were dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling broth. As they cooked, they puffed up, soaking in flavor while making the dish hearty enough to feed a family. For many, this meal was more than just food. It was a symbol of resilience. Mothers and grandmothers stood at stoves, turning scarcity into abundance, crafting bowls of warmth when the world outside felt cold. A steaming dish of chicken and dumplings didn't just fill stomachs, it lifted spirits. It was survival wrapped in comfort. Across the South and Midwest especially, it became a staple of Sunday suppers and church potlucks. Neighbors gathered around tables, bowls in hand, sharing not just food but fellowship. Even decades later, the memory of those tender dumplings and savory broth lingers in family stories, tied to love, laughter, and perseverance. Today, when we look back at chicken and dumplings, it's easy to see why it deserves a place on our tables again. It's simple, filling, and rooted in tradition. A dish that proves food isn't just about flavor. It's about history and heart. So, would you bring back this Depression-era classic to your kitchen? Let us know in the comments. And if you love rediscovering recipes like this, make sure to subscribe for more forgotten flavors from America. Lobster roll. There was a time when lobster wasn't the delicacy we think of today. In fact, in the 1800s, it was considered poor man's food, so common along the New England coast that it was fed to prisoners and servants. But by the early 20th century, lobster's reputation began to change, and out of this shift came one of America's most beloved seaside creations, the lobster roll. Born in Connecticut during the 1920s, the lobster roll wasn't a fancy dish. It was practical, portable, and made for workers and travelers along the coast. Chunks of freshly caught lobster were mixed simply, with butter, sometimes just a hint of lemon, and stuffed into a warm, split-top roll. It was quick, filling, and deeply tied to the rhythms of seaside life. As decades passed, two traditions emerged. In Connecticut, the lobster roll was served hot, dripping with melted butter. But in Maine, it took a different turn. Chilled lobster tossed lightly in mayonnaise, sometimes with celery, then nestled in a toasted bun. Both versions became regional icons, celebrated at roadside stands, clam shacks, and summer fairs. For families, grabbing a lobster roll wasn't just about eating, it was about memory. The smell of the salty ocean breeze, the sound of seagulls overhead, and the taste of warm butter or cool mayo against sweet lobster meat. It all blended into the story of summertime on the coast. What makes the lobster roll fascinating is its transformation. Once dismissed as humble, it grew into a treasure of American cuisine, embodying both thrift and indulgence. Today, it's rare to find it outside coastal towns in its original, simple form, without the gourmet twists and high prices. But perhaps that's why it deserves a comeback in its truest style. Rustic, unpretentious, and tied to the working-class roots of New England. Because sometimes, the simplest foods carry the richest stories. Would you choose the buttery Connecticut roll or the chilled Maine classic? The hot brown. Some recipes are born not out of need, but out of indulgence. The hot brown is one of them. Created in Louisville, Kentucky, in 1926, it wasn't designed for frugality or survival. It was crafted to satisfy late-night cravings in grand style. And it quickly became a Southern treasure. At the Brown Hotel, a lavish gathering place in the Roaring Twenties, music and dancing often carried on until the early hours of the morning. By then, hungry guests wanted more than simple sandwiches. So the hotel's chef dreamed up something new, an open-faced creation layered with roasted turkey and crispy bacon, smothered in a rich, bubbling Mornay cheese sauce, then baked until golden. It was indulgent, dramatic, and exactly what those partygoers needed after hours on the dance floor. The hot brown captured the spirit of its time. The 1920s were years of jazz, celebration, and breaking from tradition, and this dish reflected that boldness. Unlike the modest meals of rural kitchens, this was city food, showy, comforting, and unforgettable. Families who tasted it carried the memory for decades. A hot brown wasn't just a sandwich. It was an experience. The bubbling cheese as it came out of the oven, the richness of every bite, and the comfort of gathering around something warm and filling. Though its fame began in Louisville, the hot brown spread across Kentucky and beyond, appearing at diners, cafes, and church suppers. Yet over time, it quietly faded from many menus, overshadowed by faster, simpler fare. But even today, when it appears, it carries the magic of its origin, bringing us back to that glamorous hotel, where music drifted through the halls and the night ended with a plate of hot, cheesy comfort. Maybe it's time we bring it back into our kitchens, not just as a dish, but as a reminder of America's golden age of hospitality. Pasties. Some foods carry the story of work, hardship, and survival in every bite. The pasty is one of them. Brought to America in the 1800s by Cornish miners, pasties were more than just meals. They were lifelines for men who spent long days deep underground. In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where iron and copper mines drew immigrant workers, pasties quickly became part of the daily routine. A pasty was simple but brilliant, a sturdy pastry crust folded around meat, potatoes, and onions, baked until golden. Its thick, crimped edge made it easy to hold with coal-dusted hands, and when the center cooled, miners often tossed the dirty crust away, leaving the hearty filling inside. But the pasty wasn't only practical, it was comforting. Wives and mothers made them with care, packing not just food, but love into each one. In dark, dangerous mines, a warm pasty connected men back to their families and their traditions across the ocean. Over time, pasties grew beyond the mines. They became staples at church gatherings, family reunions, and local festivals in Michigan and Wisconsin. Each community put its own twist on the filling. Some added carrots, rutabagas, or even venison, but the spirit remained the same. A portable meal that could feed a worker's hunger and soul. For many descendants of miners, pasties are still tied to memory. Stories of grandfathers carrying them into the mines, or grandmothers rolling dough on floured kitchen tables, keep the tradition alive. Eating one today isn't just about taste. It's about honoring generations who endured hardship and built their lives around resilience. Though fast food and convenience eventually pushed pasties out of the spotlight, they deserve a comeback. Because they remind us that food is never just about flavor. It's about history, family, and the work that shaped America. Brunswick stew. Some recipes are so deeply tied to community that they feel less like food and more like tradition. Brunswick stew is one of those dishes, a rich, hearty blend that simmered its way into the heart of the American South. Its exact birthplace has long been debated. Some claim Brunswick, Georgia, others say Brunswick County, Virginia. But no matter where it began, its story is one of gathering, sharing, and survival. In its earliest days, Brunswick stew was a hunter's meal. Squirrels, rabbits, or whatever game was available went into the pot, slow cooked with corn, beans, and vegetables. Nothing went to waste, and the stew was designed to feed a crowd. Over open fires at church gatherings, political rallies, or family reunions, huge black kettles would bubble for hours while people swapped stories and waited with eager spoons. As time passed and ingredients became easier to come by, chicken and pork replaced wild game, but the spirit of the dish never changed. Every community had its own version, fiercely defended as the right way. Some kept it thick and hearty, almost like a chili, while others preferred it more soupy. But across all variations, it carried the same purpose: to bring people together. Families remember Brunswick stew not just for its smoky, savory taste, but for the memories it created. It was there at county fairs, church picnics, and neighborhood cookouts, always in large pots, always shared among many. A single bowl carried warmth, comfort, and the feeling of belonging. Today, Brunswick stew has slipped quietly from many kitchens, replaced by quicker meals and easier recipes. But in the South, you can still find it at barbecues and festivals, keeping its heritage alive. Maybe it's time to stir those memories again. Because a dish like Brunswick stew isn't just food. It's a reminder of community, resilience, and the joy of eating together. Hush puppies. Golden, crispy, and humble, hush puppies might just be one of the South's most charming food legends. These little cornmeal fritters weren't fancy, but they were unforgettable, born out of creativity, thrift, and a bit of folklore that still lingers today. The story goes that fishermen frying up their catch would toss bits of cornmeal batter into the hot oil alongside the fish. When the dogs barked hungrily at the smell, the fritters were tossed their way with the words, "Hush, puppies." Whether fact or myth, the name stuck, and so did the recipe. Made from cornmeal, flour, onion, and buttermilk, hush puppies were the perfect companion to fried catfish and barbecue. Crisp on the outside, tender within, they turned a simple meal into a feast. And in hard times, when meat was scarce, these fritters could stretch a meal, filling hungry stomachs with inexpensive ingredients. But hush puppies were more than just side dishes. They carried the flavor of the South's heritage, cornmeal being a staple of Native American cooking, combined with traditions brought by African and European influences. Every bite was a blend of cultures, history, and survival. Families remember them from summer fish fries, church picnics, and roadside diners. Piled high in baskets, steaming hot, they disappeared almost as quickly as they were fried. For children, they were often the first thing grabbed off the table, small, snackable, and delicious. Over time, hush puppies became symbols of Southern hospitality, offered with a smile at nearly every fish shack across the Carolinas, Georgia, and beyond. They weren't just food. They were tradition, tiny golden bites that connected generations. Today, they've slipped from many menus outside the South, but they deserve a comeback. Because hush puppies aren't just about taste. They're about the stories of families gathering, of dogs barking at the fire, and of how even the simplest foods can leave the deepest memories. Tamale pie. Some dishes are born at the crossroads of cultures, blending traditions into something uniquely American. Tamale pie is one of those recipes, humble, hearty, and rooted in both necessity and creativity. It first appeared in American cookbooks in the early 1900s, when Mexican flavors were finding their way into kitchens across the Southwest. Despite its name, tamale pie isn't a true tamale. Instead, it was an adaptation, an easier, oven-baked way to capture the flavors of tamales without the time-consuming process of wrapping and steaming. At its heart, it was a casserole, seasoned ground beef or pork layered with beans, vegetables, and spices, all tucked beneath a golden cornbread crust. Affordable, filling, and easy to prepare, it quickly became a staple for families who needed to stretch their groceries further. During the Great Depression and later during wartime rationing, tamale pie was a lifesaver. With just a little meat and plenty of cornmeal, a single dish could feed an entire family. Mothers embraced it as a way to provide comfort and variety at the table, while children loved its warm, cheesy, cornbread-topped layers that felt both familiar and new. It wasn't just food, it was culture meeting necessity. Tamale pie reflected the growing influence of Mexican cuisine on American palates, while still fitting into the budget-conscious world of early 20th century households. Potlucks, church suppers, and family gatherings often featured it as the centerpiece, its bubbling casserole dish carried proudly to the table. Over time, the dish quietly faded from many kitchens, replaced by frozen dinners and faster meals. But in its day, tamale pie was more than a recipe. It was a symbol of adaptation, of families making the most of what they had, while embracing flavors that would eventually shape American cuisine. Green chili stew. In the high deserts of New Mexico, there's a dish that warms both body and soul: green chili stew. For generations, it has been more than food. It's been a taste of the land itself, tied to harvests, traditions, and family gatherings. The star, of course, is the hatch green chili, roasted until smoky, peeled, and chopped into fiery, flavorful pieces. Combined with chunks of pork or beef, simmered potatoes, onions, garlic, and sometimes tomatoes, the stew was rustic but deeply satisfying. Every bowl carried the essence of the Southwest: earthy, smoky, spicy, and comforting. Historically, this dish was built on what people had available. Ranchers, farmers, and homesteaders turned simple ingredients into nourishment that could feed families through cold desert nights. The stew simmered slowly, filling kitchens with the rich aroma of chili and meat, a fragrance that promised warmth at the end of a long day. But it wasn't just about survival. Green chili stew was about community and celebration. During harvest season, when families roasted bushels of fresh chiles over open flames, the stew became the centerpiece of gatherings. Shared at kitchen tables, festivals, and church suppers, it tied people together, each spoonful carrying the flavors of home. For many, memories of the dish reach back to childhood, watching parents or grandparents stir heavy pots, serving it with warm tortillas, and warning newcomers of its heat. The stew wasn't just food, it was identity, a proud symbol of New Mexican culture that blended native, Spanish, and Anglo traditions. Though green chili stew remains beloved in New Mexico, outside the region it has quietly slipped from view. But it deserves a wider comeback. It's more than just a spicy soup. It's living history, rooted in resilience, harvest, and heritage. Would you be brave enough to try a steaming bowl of authentic green chili stew? Share your thoughts in the comments. Spoon bread. Soft, warm, and almost custard-like, spoon bread was once a southern treasure that graced countless dinner tables. Unlike the firm slices of cornbread most people know, spoon bread was so tender it had to be scooped with a spoon, hence the name. It was comfort food in its purest form, carrying history in every bite. The roots of spoon bread stretch back to Native American cooking, where ground corn was a staple. When European settlers and enslaved African cooks adapted those traditions, cornbread was born. Spoon bread, however, took things a step further, mixing cornmeal with milk, eggs, and butter to create a dish that was softer, richer, and more delicate than its humble cousin. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, spoon bread was a star of Southern kitchens. It appeared at Sunday suppers, holiday feasts, and church gatherings, often served alongside roast chicken, ham, or stews. Its texture made it stand out, part bread, part pudding, part comfort. For families, it was a dish that symbolized warmth and togetherness, something both simple and special at the same time. Many children grew up with memories of waiting eagerly at the table, the smell of spoon bread drifting from the oven, golden and steaming. When it was served, it brought not just flavor but joy, proof that food could be both humble and indulgent. Yet as decades passed, spoon bread slipped quietly into the background. Faster breads and boxed mixes replaced it, and its tender, custardy charm was forgotten in many homes. But for those who remember, spoon bread still holds a powerful nostalgia, a taste of a slower, more connected time. Today, it deserves a comeback, not just for its flavor, but for its story. Spoon bread is a reminder of how America's food history was shaped by native, African, and European influences, woven together into something uniquely our own. So, would you scoop up a warm spoonful if this classic made its way back to modern tables?